And when we complete it, we will have completed our first read of the entire book. A lot of conversations and deliberations are ongoing and will through the weekend as well. So though we will not be meeting at any time this weekend as a conference committee, we'll be back on Monday to go through the book and close it all out, because to make our June 15th deadline, which we will make, we've got to keep moving and move quickly with discernment, of course. We'll start on page 1 of Natural Resources. Secretary of Natural Resources, and the first item is Marine Protected Area Monitoring. Good morning, Ms. Bosler.
This was a January proposal that was modified in May, and this is funding to provide monitoring of California's network of marine protected areas that were mandated by the Marine Life Protection Act back in 1999. These programs have been funded by Proposition 84 bond funds for the last several years, but our proposal in the May revision is to shift this program to the general fund, as these are support costs and are more appropriate for the general fund or for another funding source, but we don't have a specific fee funding source for this purpose right now, so the general fund is what we've proposed. Our concern with starting up the Tidelands oil buckets, which was something that the state had for many years, is that the Tidelands oil revenues are deposited in the general fund. So it's really not a huge difference. But our concern is that Tideland oil revenues are incredibly volatile, and to fund programs from that funding source would subject those programs to significant uncertainty. So we prefer to keep the monies deposited into the general fund and then make a determination about what the level of funding is for the program from the general fund.
Traditionally, how would you describe the use of Tideland's oil revenue?
It's been a while since I worked on that area specifically, but I do recall that there was a waterfall of different buckets that were prioritized for the Tidelands oil revenues at a time in the past. At some point over the last several years, those buckets were eliminated and the monies were directly deposited in the general fund.
But the whole idea of the fund, isn't it, that those who produce oil pay into it, and then given that there are risks, which we are realizing as we speak, to our coastline when that oil is produced, that these funds would be an insurance policy of sorts to mitigate, clean up, protect? That was traditionally the use of it. And I'm just asking.
There was a structure in place similar to that. I would say we still have the structure of mitigation and enforcement, but it's funded from other special funds in some cases and the general fund in other cases.
LAO, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Ashley Ames with the Analyst's Office. We've raised no concerns with either house's version, as we find that the effect on the general fund is practically the same, since, as Ms. Bosler mentioned, the revenues do otherwise go into the general fund.
So you're happy either way?
We find that the effect, on the general fund would overall be the same regardless of whether you use general fund directly or direct Tidelands oil revenue towards this purpose.
And that's because of the buckets of funds? They all flow into one in this case?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have anything? All right, so the Senate proposal, of course, was shifting to the Ocean Protection Fund. So further discussion on that. Page 2 is the creation of Planning for Sea Level Rise database.
This was another budget proposal we had to implement recent legislation that requires a central repository for all of the different work that's being done by different state agencies related to planning for sea level rise. And we proposed $155,000 at the Resources Agency to implement this effort. It's a similar issue here where as the last issue, in that we proposed general fund, and the Senate's version is from Tidelands Oil directly.
Same conversation. Ms. Ames, anything to add here?
No, yeah, we would just repeat the same.
Okay. Yes, we'll be holding this one open as well. And page 3 has to do with the expansion of timber regulation and forest restoration funds.
Yes, I understand there's an LAO compromise here. Is there? Yes. So this was a proposal we had to make sure and modernize our timber regulation and forest restoration activities, partly by funding an IT project and making sure all of the infrastructure is in place to ensure that the legislation that enacted the fee are in place.
Ms. Ames.
Yes, we do have a compromise here. It would be to approve the proposal but modify the proposed provisional language to also require JLBC review of this IT project once it gets final approval from the Department of Technology, but prior to expenditure of the funds. And that's the handout that was just passed out.
Thank you. Yes, we do have the handout. Can you just tell us a little bit about this IT project?
Yes. So my understanding is that this project is in relation to the timber harvest regulatory activities, an expansion under this program that was also part of an April finance letter from Natural Resources Agency. And I believe that's the stage 1 business analysis portion of the IT project has been submitted to the Department of Technology and approved, and that the department has requested an exemption from further Caltech review, but my understanding is they have not yet received either a final approval on the project or that exemption. And so the Assembly approved as budgeted, but the Senate only approved a portion of the request that was not related to the IT project and asked the department to return with the IT portion of the proposal upon the final sign off by Caltech. And so our compromise would, allow the legislature to have some legislative oversight once Caltech has finished their review of the project, but without delaying it until the next budget year.
Thank you. We do appreciate the compromise. Just one last question before we consider it. Ms. Bosler, a number of these natural resources late May revision proposals came very late in May, and one of our challenges was to have time to really give them review. Any particular reason why the timing was such?
I would say there's probably a backstory on every single one, but many things are, the bulk of our work is done in the fall. But many times there's things out in the world that happen that require response, and so many of the items are related to issues that we thought government needed to act on something to correct something from the past or to move something forward. So there's a variety of reasons, but we definitely, trust me, at Finance, we also want to stick to the fall really being where the bulk of the budget development is, and then the springtime is really for adjustments.
Yeah. All right, Assemblywoman Weber.
Yeah, we move approval of the LAO compromise.
We have a motion for the compromise. 2-1, Senate side. 2-1, Assembly side. Senator Nielsen.
If I may briefly, Mr. Chairman, for your last observations, this is of great concern to me, too, the time to review. And I want to thank you, and I will thank you again as we proceed to try to give us enough time to review things as best we can. But it's going to govern my vote and my recommendations on some of the trailer bills, that these are major, major policy changes that no policy committee has had any chance to review. It's just a very bad way to do government. And, Ms. Bosley does give us some reasons. They're valid reasons, but this legislature has a greater responsibility to be able to be deliberative, and I just am going to argue we should be.
We appreciate the comment, Senator Nielsen, and with regard specifically to page 3, the LA compromise really does that, make sure that the legislature will continue to have some involvement as the project goes forward. Page 4 is a threshold evaluation report.
This is an evaluation report for the Tahoe area. This is a joint project with the state of Nevada. We've proposed $325,000 from the license plate funds dedicated to the California Tahoe Conservancy for this purpose. And I believe that the difference here is the Senate went with general fund as opposed to the special fund source that we think is appropriate funding source for this study.
Thank you, Ms. Ames.
Thank you. We found that the proposal was reasonable as the evaluation does benefit the Tahoe area, and our understanding is that historically the ELPF has been used to fund this report. We would just note that part of the Senate's action on the ELPF, they did approve budget bill language requiring a working group to convene to consider the future uses of this fund. And so we think this language has merit, and if adopted, the working group should consider at that time for future evaluations and whether they should be funded with ELPF.
So this report has been funded with these dollars before?
I don't know if it's actually been funded with the Lake Tahoe Conservancy account specifically, but that account is within the Environmental License Plate Fund, and the Environmental License Plate Fund has been used historically for the report.
How do you think of the Tahoe Conservancy funds being used traditionally? Is it more for quality improvement and
Yes, and it does
water quality?
Support the Tahoe Conservancy and other projects like restoration projects and that type of thing in the area of Lake Tahoe. And it's also supported generally by the sales of the Lake Tahoe license plate specifically.
We're agreeing with the Senator, right?
Assemblywoman?
Yeah, we moved the Senate recommendation.
So we would use the general funds according to the Senate proposal. Senator Nielsen, 3-0.
3-0.
3-0. Page 5 is the Environmental License Plate Fund.
Yes, there's a lot going on this page, but the bottom line is that the Environmental License Plate Fund does have a structural imbalance that needs to be addressed. We propose to come back after this fall, with a comprehensive proposal to address the imbalance going forward. In the current year, in our current proposal, we have a few actions to make it through the 15-16 year before we can do a more comprehensive assessment and then also a solution. But for the budget year, we do propose a few short-term strategies, including increasing the ELPF fee is one action that's not short-term, but the other items are one-time funding shifts and also some one-time expenditures that we think the ELPF can support through the budget year, but we do recognize there are some ongoing problems with this fund and need to come back with a more comprehensive solution.
So, but doesn't the trail bill language address a fee increase?
Yes, so that's the only part that it's part of an ongoing solution, but it's not going to be the only thing that we need to do to ensure that the fund is in balance.
So I think inherent in the Senate alternative is that there's trail bill language to require you to convene a working group to develop a new plan, but that we wouldn't be raising the fee in the meantime until we figure out what the plan is going to be. Ms. Ames, what are your thoughts?
Upon our review, we found that both options seem to be a reasonable way to address this shortfall.
You're too agreeable this morning.
Trying to make everyone happy.
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Of course. Ultimately, it reflects the legislature's priority for this fund. In terms of spending packages, you could take either approach to address the shortfall in the budget year. The Senate package does rely a little bit more on the general fund by reducing revenue to the general fund through the Tidelands oil revenue. So to the extent that the general fund is a concern, you may prefer the assembly package. But overall, they both do address the shortfall in the budget year. And regardless of which option you do choose, we find that the trailer bill language to increase the plate fees would help ongoing, as Ms. Bosler mentioned, especially as, there are further cost pressures on the fund moving forward. And we also find that the trailer bill language that you mentioned from the Senate to form the working group certainly has merit to consider the uses of the fund in the long term.
Can you give us a very brief history of the Environmental License Plate Fund?
Yes, my understanding, and I know that it was mentioned in our hearing, was that some general fund expenditures had been shifted towards the Environmental License Plate Fund in recent years, and I know our office put out a publication on that several years ago, but they included some of the things that are part of the Senate's proposal, like funding for the Ocean Protection Council and funding for some of the ongoing expenses for some of the conservancies, for example.
Keep this open?
We'll keep this open. We do like the assembly version of it, but we also like the trailer bill language from the Senate in terms of asking for a working group. So we'll keep that open. Hopefully we will come to some understanding of that.
Senator Nielsen.
Just an observation. Here yet again in government, we're rewarding overspending, and we're having reforms chase fee increases. I'm a hard no vote and will recommend that. You come to us with the reforms hot hat in hand, then we can consider fee increases because we know we've got some of the controls in place to do something about it. But this working group, they will or will not meet. They will or will not submit a report. Their report will or not be acted on by the legislature. Reformed will or not come, but the fee will be there, and the enticement to continue to overspend will remain.
Senator Nielsen, we're seeing eye to eye on that. We'll keep that open for now. Page 6 is the residential center expansion and site selection.
The governor's May revision included $200,000 to conduct a study to reopen some of the residential centers that the Conservation Corps used to have prior to the recession. We think this is a very efficacious way to serve these young people that do choose the Conservation Corps as an experience and a work experience and learning experience, and we would like to look at opening additional residential centers in the near future, but we really need to kind of do the groundwork studies to look at our existing facilities and where the work is to best match a new residential facility with where the population is and also where the work is. We're comfortable with either version. The Senate version is acceptable.
And the difference being the one-time funding or the ongoing. And your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. James Hacker, LAO. As Ms. Bosler noted, the Assembly approved this item as budgeted, and the Senate only approved the first $200,000 of spending related to site search and selection for 2015-16, as well as supplemental reporting language requiring the Conservation Corps to report on the appropriate number of residential facilities and their future plans before approving additional funding for those facilities. The Senate did not provide funding for the opening or operation of the Magalia Conservation Camp. And we would propose a compromise on this issue, specifically the Assembly version minus the out-year funding for site search and selection for two reasons. First, we believe that the...
So that would drop the supplemental reporting language?
Sorry, with the supplemental reporting language in place. The rationale being that we believe the out-year request for site search and selection funds is premature given the lack of details and the limited time to review any details that are provided. And requiring the Conservation Corps to come back in January with a more detailed request would allow the legislature to better consider that request without interrupting the planned activities in 2015-16. We recommend approving the ongoing funds for the operation of the Magalia camp beginning in 2016-17. As the region in which that camp sits is the only region in the state that doesn't have a residential fire camp. as this camp would be operated jointly with CAL FIRE. And we believe that opening and operating that camp would improve the ability of CAL FIRE and the Corps to provide fire suppression services.
We move approval of the Senate version.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I think the compromise has to do with the Magalia Conservation Camp, so that's page 16, which we'll get to yet. So we can talk further about it. Meanwhile, we do have a motion for the Senate version, and that would be 3030.
This was a May revision proposal to shift some underutilized monies left over from ARA funds, the federal funds that came during the recession. And we're proposing to repurpose these to various energy efficiency programs that would be targeted at local governments.
Any deadlines on these last ARA funds at all?
No, there are not. These were managed by third-party administrators, and so the Energy Commission had gone through and really did an evaluation of all of these third-party administrators and scooped up monies that were really not being underutilized for a variety of reasons, and came back with this proposal to really focus and trying to get those monies out for their intended purposes, which is to reduce energy.
My memory of the fading ARA era reminds me that it was, at least in part, if not in great part, about creating jobs. Will we see job creation with the expenditure of these funds in this fashion?
That is part of the intent.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Ross Brown with the LAO. The Senate rejected this proposal and the Assembly adopted the proposal. We recommend going with the Senate. While the proposed use of funds has some merit, in our view, the proposal deserves more thorough evaluation about how it fits into the state's overall strategy for energy efficiency activities. For example, an Energy Commission Energy Efficiency Action Plan is still in draft form. And we feel like once that plan is final, the legislature will be in a better position to evaluate this program amongst its other energy efficiency programs.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any questions? Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is there an expiration date on these funds?
There is not. There is not one with these federal funds. It's unusual.
And we've had, I'm sorry, when did we receive, how long have we had these funds?
2008-9, I believe. Yes.
And we still don't have you're suggesting that we develop a plan first before we use this money? But we've had it since 2008 or 9 and we don't have a plan yet. Is that?
I think we're suggesting that the state and the legislature sort of take a look at how these funds fit into sort of the broader collection of energy efficiency programs that the state is planning on having moving forward.
Okay, well, we've had the funds for quite some time. I think this is certainly a good use of them. I hate to, continue to wait to develop a plan rather than put them to good use today. Take that for what it's worth.
We're going to keep this open at this point. Senator Lara.
Thank you. I have a question. Are these new programs, or are these programs already been in place?
Ellen Roddy, Department of Finance. The proposed programs are new programs, would be new programs that would be operated at the local level and benefit local agencies, be used for local government projects, mostly focused on residential and commercial building energy efficiency upgrades and retrofits.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I mean, as we discuss this, I think this would merit more policy discussion. I think if we're going to be creating new programs, I think the legislature should have an opportunity to weigh in the efficacy of these programs that are being proposed.
All for further consideration. Okay. Page 8 is a new solar homes partnership and governor's proposal.
This is the new solar homes partnership trailer bill language that was proposed in the May revision, and it's really to designate the Energy Commission as the administrator for this program. We understand there's some compromise trailer bill language that everyone's been working on that we are supportive of.
And Mr. Brown?
The Senate did not hear this proposal, and the Assembly approved and added trailer bill language to add a sunset to the New Solar Homes Partnership Program. We recommend the Assembly version. We feel it's reasonable to give PUC the authority to determine the administrator of the New Solar Home Partnership Program. The CEC, we note, is currently administering the program, and we also believe that a sunset is a reasonable approach. The funding is expected to run out within the next year or so.
Senator Lara?
Mr. Chair, I move the Assembly version.
All right, we have a motion for Assembly version.
With the technical language change.
Right.
Excuse me if I
Yes.
may, Ellen Wright again, Department of
course.
Finance. We would just ask that we can live with the Assembly version just as long as we clarify that that June 2018 sunset date applies to reservations for the program as opposed to actual expenditures.
That's the technical language that
Yes.
we have, that corrections.
That's
yes.
the compromise that's under
Yeah.
development.
Okay, good to confirm that.
Perfect.
Senate side, 2-1, 2-1 Assembly. Power plant siting fee. Ms. Bosler?
Yes, this was some trailer bill language that we proposed to deal with an issue that our current fee structure for the permitting of power plants does not cover, and that's the costs associated with major amendments or changes to existing power plant projects. So we are proposing a fee system that will allow the Energy Commission to recoup costs associated with those modifications to existing permitting plants. And that's the trailer bill. We are fine with either version here.
All right, Mr. Brown, you have thoughts?
Yeah, both houses adopted the trailer bill language, but the Senate amended it to allow for a fee amount less than $5,000. We recommend the Senate version. We think a lower fee amount to more closely ties sort of the costs of the amendments with the actual proposal, and so we recommend the Senate version. We think that's a reasonable approach.
Very good. Ms. Bosler, most cases, costs would not be less than $5,000?
That's correct.
Yeah, all right. Senator Lara?
I move the Assembly version.
Okay, Senator Nielsen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you know, here we're almost giving a blank check to agency government to raise fees. If it was ever 5,000, I might even be able to vote for it because there'd be a limitation. But we're going to give it a cap of 750,000. Again, item by item, over year after year, the legislature has given this power to these agencies to just arbitrarily at their will decide how much they need and charge right up to the brink, putting fees on Californians. It's got to be a no.
Thank you, Senator. So we do have a motion for Assembly. It's 2-1 on the Senate side and 2-1 on the Assembly side. We're moving on to the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, and an issue of concern to many, underground injection program. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, this is definitely in the area, as we discussed earlier, something that there were multiple actions that happened that really necessitated government action in reaction. So the underground injection control program has had some significant compliance issues that have been brought out by the U.S. EPA. The administration has a 2-year plan to come into compliance, really built around our proposal that we brought forward on April 10th, along with the May revised proposal for a data management system. This includes 23 positions at the Department of Conservation that will be reviewing all of the water, the groundwater aquifers to make sure that any kind of oil drilling activity in that area is in compliance with US EPA, and then also some additional positions at the State Water Board as well. And we're not supportive of the Senate's shift to the Water Board because it really disrupts the overall compliance efforts that are required by the US EPA. The US EPA does require the Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources to do the compliance work, and that they are the delegated authority by the US EPA. And so while the Water Board does have an important role and component, which is why we did add additional positions and funding authority to the Water Board's budget, it's really important that we build the resources at the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources in order to comply with the US EPA orders. And also just the database management system, which we agree is a late request, but this is really a critical component that we must move forward on to implement to be in compliance with US EPA, and also to implement SB4, which is imperative to have the oversight and the transparency to the public about what actions are being taken. And so this database management, we have some budget bill language that we've been working on with your staff, and to ensure the proper oversight by the JLBC, but it's really critical that we start the process to move this forward.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah, the Assembly approved the governor's proposal. I would like to walk through the Senate proposal in a little bit of detail because there are a few different pieces to it. The Senate adopted a shift of the Department of Conservation positions and funding to the Water Board. It also approved the Water Board's proposed funding, but also shifted about $800,000, the fund source of about $800,000 from oil and gas to water discharge permit fund. It also requests a BSA review of the funding for the program. It also added trailer bill language to codify the Water Board's implicit veto power over activities the Dogger permits that impact water quality. It approved trailer bill language to allow Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Wildlife, to access open pits and ponds for regulatory purposes, and required an independent review of Dogger's UIC operations. We have a proposed compromise that we think addresses pieces of both houses. The proposed compromise would adopt the Assembly's version of the funding, so the positions would stay at the Department of Conservation, and also the fund source that the governor proposed for those activities. The workload associated with regulating wells is Department of Conservation's regulatory responsibility, and the Water Waste Discharge Permit Fund we feel is an appropriate fund source for the Water Board's activities. The compromise would also include the Senate's BSA review and funding of funding and program requirements, and we feel that's appropriate given the additional resources that have been allocated to the Department of Conservation and Dogger in recent years. The compromise would not include the trailer bill language allowing Fish and Wildlife to access the open ponds, and it would also not include the Senate's language that would include the independent review of Dogger, as we feel EPA is currently reviewing a lot of the activities related to the UIC program.
Mr. Brown, I'm going to ask for your forthright answer here, only because I think this issue is so very important. What is your assessment of Dogger's operations over the past few years, specifically with regard to decisions they've made that have potentially, if not in fact, put drinking water in California at risk?